more secure and healthier, while ensuring that they and the people who live within them become resilient to the challenges that the future throws at us. Without any further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, Dr. Awni Behnam, to make his 15-minute presentation. I understand that, Awni, you shall be reading a statement to us. So please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for accepting to present at this panel. So, Dr.
Thank you very
Behnam.
much, Antonella. Thank you very much, Antonella, and greetings to the Secretary General of the forum. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to say a few words about the evolution of the blue economy and the relationship to coastal cities and coastal settlements. Actually, this year coincides with the 10th anniversary of an exceptional historic event, 210, when the World Expo was convened under the theme of Better Cities, Better Life in Shanghai. I was privileged then to be appointed as UN Commissioner General, and in that capacity, I convened a national press in Shanghai entitled Ocean Climate Change and Sustainable Development, Challenges to Oceans and Coastal Cities. The conference addressed the future challenges to coastal cities in the urban-ocean nexus. The debate on ocean and urban interaction contributed to an emerging understanding at the time of the blue economy paradigm, based on a definition of living with the ocean and from the ocean sustainably. The conference acknowledged that most urban centers are experiencing a fast, largely uncontrolled population growth, particularly in developing countries, and that it was more evident in coastal areas. The attraction of sea coast since time immemorial as an ideal site for human settlement has been associated with the link of the original evolution of life from the sea, which creates a profound link between humans and settlement. Settling along a large body of water, such as seas, lakes, rivers, has historically been a vital factor in the economic and demographic growth of cities. 75% of megacities with population over 10 million are in this category. The economic and social environmental cost of COVID-19 pandemic has been enormous and beyond the resilience of most least developed countries, developing countries, and countries in transition. COVID-19 revealed the extent of the absence of preparedness of humans in facing the scourge of an epidemic. Hence, the lessons learned not only show us how humans need to be prepared to overcome future pandemics and future challenges of that scope, but how to live and thrive in a new normal. I will therefore focus remarks as it relates to coastal cities and coastal urban nexus of cities, which rely on the blue economy in their urban coastal interdependence of economic, environmental, and social interactions, and such as engagements, maritime trade, maritime transport, ports, harbors, shipping, inland logistics, connectivity, fisheries, access to ocean natural resources, living and non-living services, energy, recreation, tourism, hospitality, etc., which are the narrative of the blue economy. Let me recall, we first took the concept of the blue economy to Rio +20, and how we held there this very forum, the GFS, HS, in Rio. It was the first time the concept received international exposure and became sooner than anticipated a household name, and hence took many shades of blue. Most welcomed, not without self-interest, prospects of extracting and benefiting from the ocean's abundant services and resources, while regrettably ignoring at the same time the conditionality of living with the ocean sustainably by protecting life and property. Hence, we recognize the critical need for multilateral policy change from an extractive mindset to a regenerative relationship in an urban-ocean nexus. The two most immediate critical challenges that are being lately addressed at the UN ICP are the major impacts of climate change and the consequences of sea level rise on human settlements and coastal zones and beyond. Climate change is placing increasing pressure on coastal regions, as we heard this morning, which are already seriously affected by intensive human activities. This raises the question as to what extent these areas will remain and retain their residential, economic, commercial, social, and physical values in decades and centuries to come, and whether they instead may pose a threat to the human race. One undeniable existential threat being sea level rise. The then Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, recalled in his message of 3 October 2011 that 60 million people live within 1 meter of sea level. The challenge extends to the need for protection of human life, way of life, and property from the consequences of sea level rise and related challenges of extreme weather that come with it, natural hazards, hurricane, storm surges, damage to the ecosystem, and other consequential impacts. Clearly, this calls for a change in mindset and transformative governance tools geared towards resilience, mitigation, adaptation, innovative technology solutions, and adequate financial commitments, as well as human behavioral change in terms of the blue economy concept of living with the ocean sustainably. Mr. Ban Ki-moon stated that rising sea level are a major impact of climate change. 60 million people now live within 1 meter of sea level. By the end of this century, the number will jump to 130 million, and today we heard more even. Major coastal cities, Alexandria, New York, Karachi, Calcutta, Berlin, New Orleans, Shanghai, Tokyo, Lagos, Miami, and Amsterdam could face serious difficulties. The nexus between urbanization and climate change is really potentially deadly. It took almost 10 years for a comprehensive report to break the silence. On 16 March this year, UN Secretary General Guterres, recalling the IPCC report, that it is certain that the global mean of sea level is rising, and there is also high confidence that the rate is accelerating, and sea levels are at historically rare, will become common in 2100. And IPCC study confirmed that approximately 190 million people globally currently occupy land projected high tide lines for 2100 under current carbon emission scenarios, while up to 630 million people live on land below projected annual flood levels for 2100. In reference to the IPCC, the cumulative physical impact of sea level rise may increase the exposure of the poor, low-lying island dwellers, and those in situation vulnerable to climate-related extreme events and related economic and social environmental shocks as disasters, as well as the inequality within and among countries. It was also noted that women face more barriers to mitigating environmental change, Consequently, sea level rise is not only a threat multiplier, but exasperates challenges relating to basic human needs, including water, food, health, and livelihood, and consequential implications for human security in an existential threat, also to commitments towards achieving the 230 SDGs. Observing impacts of sea level rise remains challenging owing to the influence of other climate-related non-climate drivers, such as infrastructure development, human-induced habitat degradation. Similarly, because coastal sea level change is often small compared with other processes, such as demographic, resources, land use, and anthropogenic subsidence. New literature has shown the extreme water levels at the coast are rising because of mean sea level rise, and that's having observable impacts on chronic flooding. The IPCC reports that there are also emerging signs of direct adverse consequences of rising sea levels on shoreline processes and on the salinity levels of estuaries. Other communities are not immune. They are experiencing frequent flooding events that can be associated also with the sea level rise. And it's predicted that due to the thermal expansion, sea level rise will increase by approximately 75 centimeters. And if, on the other hand, all glaciers, ice sheets melted, it would rise, sea level rise would be at 65 meters, causing some island states, even some parts of countries, to disappear, from Florida to Bangladesh. While this is a scenario scientists think may be unlikely, that would probably take many centuries. This could eventually happen if the world keeps burning fossil fuels indiscriminately. We have already reached a tipping point in terms of the negative impacts, economic and social, of current sea level rise, which is detailed in the UN Secretary General report. Also, the frequency and duration of related hazards will impact maritime sectors, maritime trade, ports, harbors, mega coastal port cities. If some of these mega ports go under, the global economic disruption will be unbearable. Reminds me what they say about maritime transport. If we lose it, half the world will die from hunger and the other half will freeze to death. These environmental impacts on sea level rise are likely to result in adverse human, social, cultural, economic ramification. For example, according to the IPCC, the projected level affect the availability and quality of drinking water, and the increase in salination. And one wonders what you're going to do with regard to agriculture. And as the saying goes, the writing is on the wall. So we have to address mitigation and adaptation. It's inevitable that is going to happen. The danger of isolating the ocean coastal challenges from what is an inherently interrelated global development agenda is very concerning. The ocean community has expressed satisfaction for the inclusion of a separate standalone sustainable development goal for achieving SDG 14. However, the health of the ocean and human beings are closely interdependent and interrelated. whether through carbonization, poverty, hunger, climate change, and the failure to live with the ocean sustainably. Addressing something as complex as sea level rise in the development problematic requires an all-inclusive, integrated approach. Unfortunately, there remains a persistent trend to divide issues and cast them into standalone silos. That is why we will need to put multilateralism back on track as part of global response to addressing the crisis in multilateralism that we face today. There is no doubt that traditional multilateral policy and rule makers will continue to resist changing the status quo of self-interest, and the state of the ocean-urban nexus will continue to deteriorate. It is also time to end cultural procrastination and the pursuit of greed at the expense of the future of our planet's survival. This implies political will and the necessary initiatives, among other beginnings, from education systems to the preparation of human resources, to reach out to the heart and minds of future generations. When it comes to the lack of true implementation, and we address issues of multilaterally agreed solutions, we find, and particularly when it comes to effective financing, that the commitment do not go beyond the time the ink dries on the paper. We had this experience in the MDGs. Jeffrey Sachs said, there are a lot of nice words and all promises that need to be made were made. However, we are way off track on actually doing what needs to be accomplished. And this seems to be the dilemma. The MDGs came and went. And now we're asking the international community to achieve the SDGs. When we look beyond that, the answer at the moment is frightening. The international community is not prepared to pay the price to mitigate against an imminent existential threat. I listened to the distinguished Dr. Arab Habballah, his passionate statement at the preparatory event. When he said, an all-telling meaning, with all-telling, all know what has to be done. We all know what has to be done. And he's right. In mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, there are two simple yet imperative ingredients: long-term political commitment and adequate financial resources. We hear of such commitments, but in reality, they are no more than policies generated by a casino economy of the same greed in financial placebos, such as carbon trading permits, imaginary blue bonds, praises of fictitious public-private partnership devoid of actual commitments. In the origin of the blue economy, two conditionalities were supposed to be. First, the sustainable use of ocean and living resources, and the second is living with the ocean sustainably. The true interpretation of the second conditionality in the blue economy is long-term proposal to raise financial resources for protecting life and property in coastal settlements. However, it was ignored by all those who considered the blue economy to be a gateway to abundant free resources and services to fuel their onslaught on ocean-free services and common goods. By cynically not accepting the true intention of living with the ocean to protect life and property, but hiding behind nomenclatures such as ocean economy, blue growth, and many other shades of blue, in order to avoid the politically embarrassing question, who should pay and where the financing is coming from. This is at the heart of the maze of multilateral cooperation in absence of a code of conduct for transfer of technology and a code of conduct for multilateral corporations. As matters stand in addressing mitigation, adaptation, and resilience to sea level rise, financial economic resources for capacity building for developing and least developed countries are minimal and cannot make a dent in satisfying actual needs, even if one assumes political will was sufficiently strong. That's why in the blue economy, true blue economy way of thinking, the international community may be motivated to place true value on natural, freely accessed common goods and services. Two principles, who should pay, that are ethical and moral in ocean governance. And that two principles is user pay and beneficiary pays. On land, farmers pay rent, road hauliers pay tolls. One example, therefore the question rises, why those who benefit from free ocean services, living and non-living resources, pay nothing in return for the free privilege of access to those common goods of ocean and seas? When fishing industrial consortiums pay notional rents, as do land-based farmers, and shipping consortia and maritime alliances pay some tolls for the shipping lanes while contributing to ocean carbonization, as haulage companies and truckers do on land. When the extractive industries, pharmaceuticals, and cosmetic companies, cruise companies, energy enterprises, all pay for the true value of contractual obligations for their privileges and free access to resources and ocean services. This principle of token contribution could also be applied to coastal hospitality relating to ocean-based activities. Multinational traders and shippers could include financial transaction, as in the Tobin tax. If tax is an abhorrent word, let's call it donation. Only then the international community find the resources to protect the ocean and the property and life on the coasts. In effect, what is being proposed is a token contribution to be levied by those beneficiaries of free access to ocean services to go into an internationally administered fund, as in the International Seabed Authority or in regional development banks, for the purpose of meeting the needs of disadvantaged countries for mitigation of sea level rise. Understandably, given the state of multilateral cooperation stagnant in a mentality of negative concessions, such a remedy remains an elusive expectation. And I may be accused of heresy and not being conveniently politically correct. But given the trauma of COVID-19 epidemic, I hope future generations will not accuse us of not having learned our lessons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Auni. It was, I think, a very hard-hitting tour de force of many of the challenges that face us right now, isn't it? COVID will one day come to an end, but the problems we face with climate will supersede that, I think, by a lot. So thank you very much for drawing our attention to these problems that remain with us until we find a way of solving them. I would like to thank you for your presentation and at the same time invite the next speaker, Dr. Alisha Said. She will speak to us on the way the Sustainable Development Goals and the Small-Scale Fisheries Guidelines for Coastal Communities impinge on our argument. And also bearing in mind that when we talk of the blue economy, fisheries and sustainable development goals are all arguments that are really very relevant and need to be examined carefully. Dr. Said, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to those on the side of the world, and good morning or good evening to the rest. I'm just checking some technical specs. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, Alicia. We cannot see your video, but we can see your screen.
So let me see how to resolve that.
You would need to now put it into projection mode. Thank you. That's perfect.
Okay. So you cannot see me, but you can see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
I will. Let's try. Okay, so I'm Alicia Said. I'm from Malta. I'm currently the Director for Fisheries with the Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture. I have a talk about the small-scale fisheries.
Hello?
Coastal fisheries. Basically, I'm going to build upon what as to resources and different matters, which I think really speak to what I would like to point out here with regards to a perspective for coastal fisheries. So, as Oli rightly pointed out, sorry, I think my screen is okay. We have now the SDGs paving our research and policy trajectories until 2030 and beyond. And we have committed, the different governments have committed to reaching these goals with specific targets and indicators. And I think for coastal fisheries, COVID-19 has brought unprecedented impact beyond what has already been happening. What I mean by this is COVID-19 is kind of another level of concern to already existing concerns, including ecosystem health, which has been affecting coastal fisheries around the world, social justice, access to quotas, for example, or access to fishing grounds, which would then affect the livelihoods of coastal communities, and of course, in some cases, the issues of food security. All these major concerns, which were also present during the MDGs targets, are now have now been kind of integrated into the vision of the Sustainable Development Goals. However, the impact that COVID-19 has caused now, for example, the impacts on the value chain, has brought to us more questions of where are we heading? How can we use the SDGs to really formalize where we want to go, given that COVID-19 was never preempted during the discussion on SDGs, for example. So in my recent research, I have looked into how existing tools could be better aligned to provide a scope for better sustainability of coastal fisheries. So on one hand, you have the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the voluntary guidelines for small-scale fisheries. Even though in principle they are based on small-scale fisheries, they have much more to offer in terms of coastal communities. And basically, this is mostly given that now the small-scale and artisanal fisheries have gained specific attention in SDGs, SDG 14, specifically SDG 14B, which speaks about the provision of access to marine resources and markets. I think the access to resources and markets is now more felt with COVID-19, given that we have seen the impact on the value chain with fishers unable to sell their catches, markets, export markets have been affected. The price just swamped down. So we have been looking at the different strands of the different impacts of COVID-19, and specifically fisheries has been one of the key sectors to be impacted. So in this research, where I look at aligning the SDGs and the guidelines for coastal fisheries, we noted that both the guidelines and the SDGs have they are focused on sustainability, and they can kind of serve as a blueprint for small-scale fisheries. Here we speak of Europe, but of course the tools go beyond. And basically we say this because SDGs are, even though here we're speaking of SDG 14, most of the other SDGs have more to offer. So because SDG 14 will not work on its own, and because the sustainability of coastal fisheries and coastal communities also depend on other SDGs. For example, decent economic growth, food security, zero poverty. So coastal communities and fisheries cannot only be focused. So where we're heading for coastal fisheries cannot be just focused on SDG 14. For example, the focus on reducing inequalities. We have a situation where access to quotas has been mostly focused on the large-scale industrial companies. So reduction of inequality, which I think is SDG number 8, goes hand in hand with the need to look into plans to improve access to resources for small-scale fisheries. And in this table, we basically show how these two tools, so the SDGs and the guidelines for small-scale fisheries, speak to one another in various ways. So, for example, the SDG on life below water, of course, has 42 kind of corresponding lines with the small-scale fisheries guidelines. So we can see that how as the guidelines can be used to inform how we can achieve the SDGs. So even though SDGs look nice on the paper, as Dr. Benham pointed out, now we have the tools with the guidelines to specifically show what coastal fisheries need to achieve their sustainability. And I think here we argue for a more transdisciplinary approach, because sustainability concerns are interconnected. You have access to resources, you have issues of food insecurity, overfishing, and also violation of human rights in certain cases, which sometimes are all linked to failed institutions. You have a problem of looking how fisheries, for example, are looked at. If they are looked at only from the natural perspective and the natural science perspective, it kind of defies the bigger problem which fisheries face in terms of markets, as I was explaining before. So the need to capture the roots of the problem and understand how more empirical research could inform context-based governance in this regard, using the SDGs as the framework, but the guidelines as the tools, could help better inform where one could arrive in devising the post-pandemic resilient tools for coastal communities. And based on this, I think we have three focus here. And I think this is the Blue Economy seminar, the webinar that we are following here. I think we can have a discussion here about the sustainability, but then we have to decipher what it means not only for institutions, but what it means for the coastal communities themselves, the different individuals and the needs that they have. And then defining their sustainability through policies. So here we have this research and policy synergy that need to go hand in hand. So with regards to discussing sustainability, as I already mentioned, we need to have a conversation about how the social and the natural science research need to be better aligned to achieve these ambitious goals. On the other hand, deciphering sustainability, meaning putting the deciphering what sustainability means for the different people, we need to also understand that even though a fishery problem is usually assigned a natural science perspective, we need to understand how the fishery is interconnected in the community, to the markets, to the political economy, and the different structures which, although not always visible, have a determinant role in the viability equation of coastal communities. And the last thing is defining sustainability and the way forward, the need to really not just speak, but more walk the talk of where we want to arrive in terms of really and truly implementing policies that speak to the people and which have the voice of the people in them. Because COVID-19 has showed us that status quo cannot be retained, but we really now need to find solutions with the people and from the people together. So yes, that's all from my end. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you today, and I will take any questions if there are any. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Said. We very much appreciate the way you have emphasized that, you know, the issues even of fisheries, be they artisanal, be they larger in scope, are not only a question of sustainability, a question of the blue economy, but also a question of the socio-political landscape of cities and the communities in which these fishers are rooted. So thank you very much. If there are questions, I remind you, please address them in the chat box. There are some questions coming up, and if there are questions for a specific speaker, you may put that and sign in front of and the name, and we will address your questions to the appropriate speaker if we have time later. Thank you once again, Dr. Said. I will move without further ado to the next speaker. The next speaker who is Dr. David Vivas-Yegui from UNCTAD in Switzerland, will be speaking to us about another pillar of the blue economy, which is in fact coastal tourism. Tourism does not occur in a vacuum. It impacts upon the communities in which it happens. It impacts upon the blue economy in this case. So I leave it in the hands of David, please, to guide us through your presentation and to bring forward the points relevant to this panel. Thank you very much. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Antonella. Thank you very much to the organizers. It's always a pleasure to speak after Auni Benham. He has been my teacher and professor, so I'm going to try to be up to the standards. So I'm going to share my screen right now. 1 second. I will be addressing a quite complex topic today. Can we see the presentation? Can we see the screen? Can we see it?
Yet. Yes, now yes.
Fantastic. I just wanted to
project the screen now. Yes.
Okay. So if everybody see it, I will be focusing on coastal tourism, but more precisely on a very current topic, which is the impact of COVID-19 on vulnerable populations. We're talking about human settlements and options for recovery. The presentation will cover the main trends of tourism and coastal tourism today with the impacts of COVID-19, quite apocalyptic. And then we will explain what countries are doing to mitigate impacts and what we can do in the short term and long term to mitigate and find resilience to these type of impacts. The first point is that the tourism sector is one of the blue economy sectors that basically builds on ecosystems and on ecosystem services. It is about 29, almost 30% of all world services exports. And that is a speak which I...
Please. Hello? Can you please? Is this the interpretation? Okay.
David, you are on mute.
Yes, you're on mute, David.
I didn't mute it. Hello?
Yes.
Sorry about these technical problems. I will try to start again. I'm sorry. Again, the first point is that tourism is perhaps the largest sectors of the world. It represents 30% of all world services export, okay? Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the tourism sector was growing at a 4% rate. That's not the case anymore. And it recorded about $1.6 trillion in value and more than 300 million jobs. Just to give you an idea, the next biggest oceans economy sector is maritime transport, and is 500 billion, so half a trillion. So tourism is 3 times bigger than the second biggest oceans economy sector. And in terms of jobs, it's also perhaps the most important. Now, when we talk about tourism, half of the tourists tend to take holidays by the sea. And even in terms of hotel, restoration services, transport services, half of them are usually by the coast in most countries, linked also to connectivity. Coastal tourism in certain areas, especially maritime transport, has gone to a big halt. 76% of all bookings for cruise tourism are down now, canceled or postponed. So that tells you the impact of COVID this year alone. But I'm gonna go deeper into that. Here you can see the income that countries will get as a consequence of tourism in terms of GDP share. And in some countries it's huge. See Macau, China, we're also having a conference in China, 74% of their GDP is related to tourism. If you see the next list of countries, Antigua, Barbuda, Maldives, St. Lucia, all these are island states and coastal states. The share of their inbound tourism expenditure in their GDP goes from 60% and in the lowest 20% in the case of Jamaica. It's huge. The dependence of tourism for these countries is amazing. Now, the impact of COVID-19 is, I call it annus horribilis. No? It's perhaps the worst ever reported year on the impact of tourism. Of all the blue economic sectors, tourism is the one most affected. Maritime transport have been able to recover to a certain extent. Fisheries, there was a pause, but it's recovering now because it's linked to food supply, so it's essential. But international tourism arrivals fell 65% during the first half, only the first half of 2020. And we estimate that there could be a loss in income of about 1.2 trillion. If we estimated that 1.6 trillion is almost 4/5 of the total value of the sector, is going to fall this year. And you can see in these red charts that in some months, basically from April to June, it was almost at 100% halt in many countries. They were reopening after the closing in many countries in July, August, September, but now we're going backwards again with the rebound. So we have estimated 3 scenarios from moderate to intermediate to dramatic. And where we are seeing and we are getting away from the moderate and we're starting to reach into the intermediate. So the impact at the end of the year may be bigger than expected, especially depending on the impact of the rebound in Europe, United States, and hopefully in other nations. Now, in many countries here, you can do scenarios on share of the GDP and value of income. By share of the GDP, many coastal and island states will be heavily affected, losing at least 11% of the GDP. But even for big countries like the United States, and this is in value, not in share, because these are very diversified economies, the United States and China are going to lose a lot in terms of income from tourism this year. So this is not a problem only of the small, it's a problem also of the big. I continue since we're talking about the linkage with communities, with coastal communities. Well, I have here 2 scenarios that we have built. One, the change in wages and income of skilled workers in the tourism sector. And the scenarios are not optimistic, losing 11% of their income, 12% to 34, 23, depending on the country, and how much will be the impact of the COVID, again, from moderate to dramatic. So people is losing income dramatically. This is not in terms of unemployed people, this is people that is already employed. Then in unskilled employment, the changes in wages are even worse, from 15 to 44%. income, in wages. So this is very worrisome because these are the most vulnerable people. Many of these people, unskilled workers, are the ones cleaning hotels, serving in restaurants. Many of them are seasonal workers. Many of them are migrant workers. Many of them are women. So this is a very bad impact that we will be suffering, again, depending on the scenario. So didn't want to be too apocalyptic, but I just also wanted to show what countries are doing. I choose, for example, to try to mitigate impact. And for example, one country in each region: Greece in Europe, Barbados in the Caribbean, Thailand in Asia, and South Africa in Africa. And I did an analysis according to the possible measures that could be taken, including other measures. So I include testing, quarantine, transport, hotels, social support, and other type of measure, mostly financial. In testing, all are requiring some level of testing, from high-risk countries, mandatory testing, to low-risk countries, random testing. In some countries, it's testing for anybody that comes in. In quarantine, if you get a positive, you will be subject to quarantine. What differs is how long you will be quarantined, from 1 week to 2 weeks. In transport, there are many measures for traceability of the travelers, including location forms, immigration custom forms, health screen randomly, travel and safety protocols at the plane, at the airport, special visas, because some countries are totally closed. In terms of hotels, have been an interesting reaction. You have two types: from the government, development protocols to ensure safe services for tourists, and also ensuring that there is no contamination in case one customer gets sick. But also you have actions from the private sector, already reacting and ensuring that their establishments are clean, are proper, that people has the distance, that they don't cover all the rooms, and there are special requirements even for hotels that usually are 50+ people. Social support. Again, we have several communities, coastal communities affected. And I mentioned again, seasonal workers, migrant workers, and women. Unemployment is ramping. It's growing very, very fast. Many SMEs related to the sector are suffering, especially tour operators, small restaurants, spa services, this type of things. Many countries have taken measures to deal with unemployment. Some have special measures for the seasonal workers and SMEs. This is very interesting because seasonal workers may get their income only some months of the year, the total year income. Some have also tried to protect migrants. In the case of Thailand, I think that's a very, very, very important response. In some countries like Africa, the unemployment in tourism is bringing challenges on environment, because poaching is increasing. Because then the income that communities and people would take from visitors is not happening anymore. So illegal hunting is already happening. So which is not a very good news. In terms of other measures, for example, Barbados put a 200 million recovery funds for the tourism sector. Also did a very nice scheme to say, well, if you are teleworking, you can
هتروح بكره ان شاء الله بعد
again,
خلاص
Donella.
وهنحاول انا هعمل ميتنج يوم السبت بالليل. تمام خلاص لو عندي
Excuse me, please keep your microphones muted. Thank you. David, please continue.
No problem. There was a nice scheme that Barbados devised that saying, if you're teleworking, don't be teleworking in a cold place, come to Barbados and we'll give you a visa for 1 year. So that was quite creative to attract spending and tourists for a longer period. Also, some are doing programs to shift towards domestic travel, which is interesting. In some countries, for example, in Spain, even if the coastal tourism was heavily affected, internal tourism to rural areas is increasing. That's interesting because that benefits other communities, not coastal, but at least other communities. There have been also different relief programs for certain establishments so they can survive to the year. Basically, this year for the tourism sector in COVID-19 is not making income. It's to keep on business, to survive. That's the main issue this year. Now, what can we do in this situation? Now we mentioned the apocalyptic part, and Nauni was also doing the one on climate change. I didn't analyze the link even with other problems like climate change, sea level rising, ocean acidity, which can affect ecosystems. I was focusing only on the pandemic. But there are certain things that we can do. No, I think the first one is that there should be a mix of government and private sector intervention to avoid the bankruptcy of coastal tourism. That may apply to many other sectors. So SMEs are important creators of jobs. If they disappear, you destroy the network, and you won't be able even to restart if the flows are open again. So you need to sustain it at least during the life of the pandemic for some time. You need to assist vulnerable population against the one I mentioned, women, migrants, and seasonal workers. They're really affected. You start having significant levels of poverty in coastal areas and in urban cities, of course, in urban tourism linked to the coastal tourism. We need support to support tourism to shift to new markets, and the two ones that have shown some interesting reaction has been domestic, because you cannot cross borders, so people stay in their own country, and second, rural, going to the countryside, which is the country of coastal tourism, but again alleviates the impact for some time. I think it's important to have booking flexibility. This is something that tourists appreciate today because there is too much uncertainty. They will be more tended to do a booking if they can cancel last minute, because there is a new measure that if they cannot cancel. So it attracts at least reservations and bookings. It may not be finally done, but at least creates an expectation and a potential for the sector to respond. We need to implement measures for safe tourism in both tourism countries, but also in key transport and transfer points. And this is essential because the pandemic goes with them. Now, in medium long-term measures, I think many people are talking about recovery packages. We need to make them blue. The blue component in most recovery packages is small. In the case of the United States, NOAA has announced about $500 million, which is not a lot. In France, 300 million euros for the blue economy of ocean sectors, which again is small, especially because there are many ocean sectors. It's not only tourism, it's fisheries, etc. We need to start thinking about promote economic diversification through the blue economy, increase regional integration, because you might not be linked to further value chains or value chains that are very far away from you, depending on logistical connectivity. You may need to use more e-marketing tools. Many providers of tourism services by using e-tools have been able to attract tourists directly and get their own bookings. It's working very well. Also for fisheries that was presented before, many companies have been able to market and distribute their own products directly instead of passing through big distribution chains. Education and training programs to shift from economic activity. And in that sense, we need to invest more in the sustainability of other blue economy sectors. And there are some that show promise today, even with the pandemic. One interesting one is sustainable seaweed and aquaculture. This is interesting because in many communities, and I have two examples that we are working with, one in Costa Rica, fishers go into the oyster cultivation, which is good because also filters the water and it's not a carnivore aquaculture. So it's very good in terms of food security. Many people investing in that and moving towards that because they cannot fish. And in Bali, there are not tourists, so they are starting to cultivate seaweed for food purposes, which also is a positive development. In the second area that is promising is renewable offshore energy, again, reducing emissions, reducing cost of energy, and the wind energy sector offshore has multiplied jobs by 10 over the last 10 years, nine times, sorry, over the last 10 years. So it's a sector that is creating jobs. We need to think towards the vision of what sectors will create jobs, because we are facing a scenario where we have a huge job destruction. We don't know how many of those will come back. And finally, marine research and development. And I think with the pandemic, I think scientists are very active right now, and there are many ways to prevent and develop different types of treatment for challenges ahead. I think that's all. Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure. Sorry about the interruptions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. I appreciate very much your presentation. And it seems as well that we are seeing a theme developing here of a people-centered recovery, a people-centered understanding of what we need to do next. It was present in the, I think, opening ceremony of this event, in the opening sessions, and it's something that's coming up as well, even in our panel that I have noted. I now thank you once again, David. I now move to the next speaker, Dr. Paul Holtus. is the founder of the World Ocean Council. He is unfortunately unable to be with us today at the moment for various reasons. However, he has sent his presentation as a video. So we have asked our colleagues from IOI to be able to project on his behalf. And now I invite Cosmin Kivu to start the video on behalf of Dr. Paul Holtus. Thank you. Cosmin, if you can take over from here. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Paul Holtus, CEO of the World Ocean Council, and very happy to be here to speak with you about the blue economy and ocean health, in particular with a focus on the role of the ocean business and investment community. A few words about the World Ocean Council. We are the unique international cross-sectoral business leadership alliance. So we bring together all sectors of the ocean private sector. This is shipping, tourism, fisheries, aquaculture, energy, ports, the insurance investment communities, and others. We catalyze leadership and collaboration and action on corporate ocean responsibilities. This role as the business organization for ocean sustainable development has led to the World Ocean Council being formally recognized by a growing number of UN agencies and business entities. We have a membership organization with hundreds of actively engaged companies and the world's largest global network of ocean industry stakeholders. All of these companies are coming together to work together on a healthy and productive global ocean and its sustainable use and stewardship by a responsible ocean business community. Importantly, these efforts are underlined by business value and incentives for addressing access and social license, bringing synergies and economies of scale to addressing ocean issues, and all of this leading to more stability and predictability in ocean operations. There are many priorities for sustainable development action by the business community. Some of these listed here and on the next slide include improving ocean governance and policy and planning, tackling cross-cutting anthropogenic impacts such as biofouling and invasive species, addressing plastics through the development of port reception facilities in coastal cities, and working to ensure there is food security from sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. In addition, there are climate change challenges that can be addressed through improving the role of oceans in being restored to absorb and sequester carbon, addressing the risk that is generated from sea level rise and extreme weather events. This is particularly in relation to ports and coastal infrastructure, and we will be talking more about that today. Also moving forward with the role of the ocean in providing low or no carbon energy through renewable energy sources such as wind, wave, and tidal energy. In addition, there are challenges for the ocean business community that are related to coastal cities and settlements regarding marine biodiversity, and also opportunities for industry to improve ocean knowledge through the collection of data from vessels and platforms, what we call smart ocean, smart industries. Let me first give you a sense of how busy and crowded the coastal ocean is and why the blue economy is so important to coastal cities. As you can see illustrated here, the use of the ocean area around coastal settlements is increasing in complexity and diversity, leading to a very busy and highly used ocean area around coastal settlements. This has led to the need for what is called marine spatial planning or maritime spatial planning, which leads to a more rationalized and reasonable mix of ocean economic activities. What's important here, though, is to engage the business community and determine how business and industry can optimize the benefits of marine spatial planning, reduce impacts, and ensure that the ocean business community is fully informed and involved in developing a coordinated strategy in partnership with other stakeholders for responsible ocean economic activities, particularly around busy urban coastal areas and the large and growing number of coastal cities. To get to the main topic I'd like to address today in relation to climate change and sea level rise, I think all of us are hopefully familiar with the rising seas that are affecting coastlines around the world and are projected to continue for quite some time. These areas will be affecting the future use and development of coastal cities, and will be a part of what's shaping urban areas for many, many decades to come. In addition to sea level rise, extreme weather events are increasing in severity and frequency. So this is particularly affecting the tropics, where more and more of the large and growing coastal cities and human settlements are located. As you can see in this map, the vulnerability of coastal communities is particularly strong in island areas and developing country coastal areas, leading to some significant challenges for urban planning, disaster risk reduction, and ensuring that human settlements are adapted and resilient to the growing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events coupled with sea level rise. Coastal cities and communities support a variety of infrastructure. This coastal and marine infrastructure includes ports, roads, airports, rails, power stations and electrical grids, the offshore energy facilities, fuel storage and transport, as well as other aspects of coastal economic life and human activity that is important to the health and vitality and economies of these communities, these cities, and entire nations, especially for coastal developing country nations and particularly small island developing states. So this coastal infrastructure supports a range of activities such as shipping, fishing, aquaculture, offshore energy, tourism, and other activities that really make up the core support infrastructure for modern economic life. This infrastructure is increasingly impacted by extreme weather events, and as sea level rise continues to contribute to this, these changes to the ocean system will be affecting cities and particularly the port and coastal infrastructure in a variety of ways, through flooding, through reduced access, by creating hazards to navigation, and of course the more direct impacts to communities from the storm surge and other impacts from these extreme weather events. We see more and more the reports and the images of this this effect on coastal cities and coastal human settlements as infrastructure is impacted in a variety of ways. Adaptation systems have been developed, methodology and approaches to understanding the vulnerability of coastal infrastructure and coastal settlements, modeling the storm surge, the flooding, and then really leading to the identification of what kinds of adaptation plans must be put into place to ensure that coastal infrastructure is resilient and that human settlements in coastal areas is protected and adaptation can be undertaken to ensure viable cities and human settlements can continue in the face of these impacts. At the World Ocean Council, we are working towards harnessing the role of the business and investment community in addressing these impacts to coastal and marine infrastructure, what we call a gray, green, blue infrastructure strategy that's working to address the needs for adapting the gray infrastructure, in other words, the hard concrete and cement built structures in port and coastal areas. In addition, there's the green infrastructure that provides nature-based solutions. These harness the potential for natural systems.
On your behalf. The presentation has picked up on another thread that runs through the blue economy discourse, which is the question of finances and funding. So on this note, I think it's very appropriate to invite our next speaker, Dr. Dennis Fritsch, who will be speaking to us also about financial institutions and very specifically about why financial institutions should care about a healthy ocean. This brings back maybe the circle, full circle to our original question. Why should we care? Why should people care? So thank you to the speakers so far. I invite Dr. Fritsch to give his presentation now. The floor is yours, please.
Thanks very much, Antonella, and thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Let me know if this works.
Yes, everything's okay. Yes.
Perfect. Then, yeah, again, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Dennis Fritsch, and I lead the United Nations Environment Programme's Finance Initiatives work on the sustainable blue economy and ocean finance in general. And today I want to share with you an insight into how we're working with banks, insurers, and investors on a transition towards a sustainable blue economy. And I think the first question, so why should financial institutions care about ocean finance and the blue economy? And for an answer to this question, one just has to read the global headlines over the last months. An oil spill off Mauritius, fishing fleets circling the marine protected area around the Galapagos Islands, and an ammonium nitrate explosion at the Beirut port are just 3 examples of the potentially damaging effects of mismanaged marine industries. Add to that a flood of COVID-related plastic waste, and it's clear that the ocean is in deep trouble. It seems we are actively destroying the world's largest carbon sink, largest haven for biodiversity, and a basis of food security and coastal protection for billions of people. But not all, luckily, is just doom and gloom. Banks, insurers, and investors are slowly waking up to the fact that their financial activities can have a sizable impact on ocean health. They provide capital and insurance to power marine industries, including shipping, fishing, coastal tourism, and renewable marine energy. By building sustainable blue finance practices into their decision-making processes, and by engaging with their clients on these issues, financial institutions have a unique opportunity to steer ocean industries towards sustainability, restoring biodiversity, and regenerating ocean health, and not to forget, help on the climate agenda too. And we're not only talking about preserving one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet. The sustainable blue economy also provides a business opportunity as it goes hand in hand with economic health and financial performance. If managed sustainably, the blue economy is expected to double in size to around $3 trillion by 2030. Building resilience and long-term stability into the equation allows financial players to reduce risks of default and claims, as well as profiting from innovative solutions-oriented businesses. An example here is the use of nature-based solutions, already touched upon by some of the speakers early on, for climate mitigation and adaptation by coastal cities and communities. In the past, as a measure to combat storm surges and sea level rise, coastal regions traditionally looked at grey infrastructure like seawalls, which are expensive and not very effective in the long term. Additionally, these structures often destroy natural and protective coastal habitats and structures like mangrove forests and marshlands. Further, these habitats were and are still disappearing at an alarming rate due to the quick and short-sighted development of coastal areas for tourism and unsustainable agriculture, amongst other business activities. If healthy marine coastal habitats like mangrove forests, coral reefs, and seagrass meadows act like a natural layer of protection from the ocean's power, dissipating wave energy and lessening the impact of storm surges, tsunamis, as well as preventing land erosion and loss from sea level rise. Additionally, when if healthy, they act as havens for biodiversity and nurseries for fish, thereby often having a positive effect on local fisheries efforts. And as many countries, especially in Asia, have come to learn, as a massive driver for tourism income, if protected. Globally, communities, governments, and financial institutions are slowly waking up to the opportunities lying in shifting their attention and efforts to protecting coastal regions, working with nature rather than against it. This is most notable when looking at prevented losses, and this means financial losses prevented for coastal settlements and assets, as well as from an infrastructure and human lives point of view, where nature-based solutions provide improved resilience of coastal settlements and communities to the increasingly strong impacts of the climate crisis. Seeing this importance in focusing on ocean health as a mechanism to lower risk and focusing on opportunities from investing in solutions brought about the creation of the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles, which were launched in 2018 as the world's first global guiding framework and gold standard for banks, insurers, and investors to finance a sustainable blue economy. The principles were developed by the European Commission, the European Investment Bank, the World Resources Institute, and WWF, and have been hosted by UNEP-FI since late 2019. They target the conservation and sustainable use of the ocean and the de-risking of investments in the blue economy, aiming to direct capital towards activities and projects which directly contribute to achieving SDG 14, life below water. What is new about the concept of the blue economy is the realization of the financial sector and governments that a holistic view of ocean health and all sectors that impact it is more beneficial, realistic, and efficient than looking at maritime sectors individually, as has traditionally been the case. In the end, the ocean knows no borders, and linkages between activities and impacts across maritime sectors are varied. As an example, as mentioned earlier, the destruction of coastal marine habitats like mangrove forests for tourism development often negatively impacts the local fisheries sector because a key nursery habitat for fish and other marine species is decimated. In order to mobilize the financial community, we at UNEP-FI are working closely with banks, insurers, and investors, but also with governments to build industry-wide guidance and tools on financing a sustainable blue economy. We're currently working to produce industry-focused technical guidance for these financial actors on how to implement the aforementioned principles, or in short, how to invest, lend, and insure sustainably in the blue economy. For this, we'll cover 5 key sectors in this initial version of the guidance, which will be seafood, so that's wild-caught fisheries and aquaculture, ports, so that's a bit more infrastructure focused, maritime transport, which includes shipping, then coastal and marine tourism, and renewable energy from the ocean, highlighting sectoral risks, opportunities, as well as best practices in the field. We've already have over 40 members on board of the initiative, among them many of the world's largest financial institutions, such as Aviva Investors, BNP Paribas, the European Investment Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, or Willis Towers Watson. In addition, we can also draw on the expertise of supporting organizations such as the OECD, WWF, the Nature Conservancy, and the World Resources Institute, for example. With many pioneering institutions already on board, I want to officially invite any financial institutions and other organizations interested in contributing to this effort to join the global community of practice and take a leadership role in shaping the future of financing the blue economy. So please do get involved via our website or by dropping me an email, and I'm happy to take any questions afterwards, of course. Thank you very much. I'm going to try and stop sharing. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Fritsch. Thank you very much for your presentation and for what I think is a very succinct wrap-up of a very important topic, which is who will pay for this. And it was briefly mentioned by Auni at the beginning, and we've come full circle to this again. Before I move to any questions, which we are collecting on the chat box, and you're free to put any questions, especially by addressing it to a particular speaker, a question. I would like to bring in our 3 commentators who have offered and been invited to offer a very brief commentary on the topic of this panel. The first commentator I would like to invite is Professor Mao Bin from China. And Professor Mao, I would very much appreciate that you would share with us your commentary at the moment. I understand you are still with us.
Yes.
So Dr. Mao, fantastic. Yes, welcome, Dr. Mao.
Thank you very much, Madam Antonella Massala. Thank you for your giving such a chance to make comments. But first of all, I would like to extend my warm congratulations on the successful opening of the 15th annual session of the Global Forum on Human Settlements in such difficult times. The forum will help us to get prepared to meet the challenges of post-pandemic recovery and transformation. Well, the Chinese translation of transformation is 离变, which means breaking the cocoon in the butterfly, and implicates that the outcome of this transformation is good or maybe good, but the process of the transformation is extremely difficult and even painful. Indeed, we are experiencing a century of unprecedented changes. I listened to 5 presentations carefully and with great interest. All of the 5 presentations are well prepared and hit the theme of the forum. We need resilient cities and inclusive cities and sustainable development and blue economy than ever before. I would like to thank you all for your very good or excellent presentation. I learned quite a lot from your presentation. I even will share your views and with my colleagues. Actually, there are quite a few of my colleagues are listening to your presentation, including my son. It is no doubt that COVID-19 has adverse impact on human settlement, including ocean environment. But it is hard to specify what is the direct impact on the ocean. To minimize the adverse impact of COVID-19 on ocean governance and sustainable development, we may draw on the lessons and experience of prevention and treatment of COVID-19. I would say in China, the most practical and effective management measures for large-scale management subjects, such as ocean governance and the management of fishery activities, is the combination of centralized and unified governance and community management, and establishment of a standing emergency management mechanism. We will conduct studies in this field and introduce our research outcomes to the IOI China Regional Center Ocean Governance Training course in 2021. Thank you very much, Antonella, and thank you very much all my friends for your excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mao. It's a wonderful metaphor, the one you have given us of the butterfly breaking out of the cocoon. And it also gives us some hope that out of this, something beautiful may emerge, something more positive for all of us. So thank you very much for your few words of commentary. I would like to now invite Dr. Chertsak Veerapat to join us. Chertsak is also an old friend of many people in this panel. So Chertsak, would you like to give us a few words, your commentary on this panel before we move to the next section?
Thank you very much, Antonella. Good evening, my teacher, Dr. Auni Benham, my colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great honor to be with you today. My comments will be focusing on before COVID and what shall we do now. Prior to COVID-19, oceans have already been affected by human activities, both from land and in the waters. And due to economic benefits that accrue from access to marine transportation, fisheries, tourism, recreation, human settlements are more concentrated in the coastal zone, as you know. About 40% of the world's population, or about 3.1 billion, now live within 100 kilometers of the coast. And as the population density, economic activity in the coastal zone increase, pressure on coastal ecosystem also increase. And ocean health from the lens of human and natural world perspectives have been graded 60 out of 100. And this indicates that there is a lot of room for improvement. Among the most important pressure are habitat conversion, land cover change, pollutant loads, introduction of invasive species leading to biodiversity loss, coral reef bleaching, new disease among organisms, harmful algal blooms, siltation, water pollution, and threat to human health through consumption of fish and shellfish contaminated by pollution and other waterborne disease. During the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, we witnessed that never before coastal ecosystems have recovered from impact posed by human activities. Business and investment and tourism has declined, resulting in less pressure on the ocean ecosystem. And small-scale fishers are reported able to catch more fish for their livelihoods and economies. In the post-COVID-19, the warning message has reached everyone. The business and investment are now looking forward to recover from economic downturn in the new normal situation. They should never carry out the same exploitation or over-exploitation as before. Internationally, they should find all possible best practices for doing business and investment, targeting optimal utilization, aiming at sustainable development. There should be adequate internal laws and regulations with effective enforcement. Financial institutions would need to adapt their policy to carefully incorporate sustainable development and protection of ocean health into all future loans and investment, with commitment, responsibility, accountability, and integrity on common resources, and reduce global warming. The blue economy tells us how important the ocean health must be maintained, which will eventually ensure our future survival. Lastly, the International Ocean Institute and its partners have been involved in empowering global ocean managers for more than 4 decades to plan and to manage ocean health through their international and regional training courses on ocean governance, trade, and sustainable development. The Financial Institute may help promote the ocean health through financial support of these important global training programs. And coastal states should also take this opportunity to collaborate with their neighbor countries on implementing related coastal policy and to reduce conflict among them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chertsak, for your words of wisdom, your commentary. And again, this is a theme that has come up in your commentary, is one of fine. We have a number of recommendations, and the question is who will do it? Who will carry out these recommendations? And you point very clearly to the need of developing capacity, of empowering people to take the right decisions, to achieve a sustainable blue economy. So I thank you for bringing up this particular note, this particular also requirement that we face. And I thank you again for your comment, Chertzak. Very much appreciated. Without further ado, I will move on to our final commentator, who is Dr. Sunil Murlidhar Shastri. I'd like to invite you to say a few words as well to the floor. Sunil, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonella, and the organizers of the Global Forum on Human Settlements and Sustainable Cities, the 15th event. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to be a commentator on presentations by this panel of eminent friends, Alicia, Antonella, Avni, Chertzak, Cosmin included, David, Dennis, Mao, and Paul. Thank you all. You have all brought the ocean to the fore, and quite rightly so. And you have also demonstrated that ocean is a vital as well as a lucrative part of our living environment. I'm sure the gravity of the current COVID-19 situation is made even more apparent when we find that even a small drop in one sector related to the ocean will account for a large drop in the GDP, wiping out the equivalent of a Spain or even a Japan. As we know, most megacities are near the coast and are hoovering up the resources and currently making humanity lawless. When I say lawless, I mean landless, airless, and waterless. Our land is polluted, our water is polluted, and our air is polluted. By increasing the pressure on these three essential commodities. But megacities can also be the catalysts for solution, because concentrations of populations allow for most solutions to be implemented over wider proportion of our increasingly urban population, currently at 55% of the world population. And we in the megacities could then turn lawful again. We could become a lawful humanity again. And that's a great opportunity that we have. Island nations across the globe have been amongst the most vulnerable to these critical risk factors from falling dollars and rising sea levels. Speaking of small scale, the fishing community may be small on the global scale, but it looms large in building a sustainable world for both ecology and economy. It is no good having a healthy bank balance if the food and water around you is not fit to drink and fit for consumption. It seems obvious then why large financial institutions would focus on ESG investments, environmental and social governance investments, as they relate to ocean business. Future generations have always tended to blame the past generations for one reason or the other. But on this occasion, let us make it as hard as possible for them to blame us by really making a positive difference. After all, as the founder of IOI, International Ocean Institute, Elizabeth Van Borghese said, the ocean is our great laboratory for making of a new international order based on new forms of international cooperation and organization, on a new economic theory, and on a new philosophy. She perhaps might have been well alluding to the new international economic order then, but now, in our times, it is our duty and we must work on a new international environmental order. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Sunil, for those few words and for ending on such a high note and such a positive note. I noticed that we have been very excellent with the time, but we are, I have to say, 5 minutes over our allocated time. So I have seen some questions in the chat box which have been answered. And if I see any outstanding questions, I will make sure to maybe forward them to or put you in contact with the speaker. I will go to the chat separately and work that one out. It would be remiss of me to draw this panel to a close without thanking very much the organizers of the 15th annual session of the Global Forum on Human Settlements for this invitation to us, to our speakers as well, to have this very effective exchange, this very efficient exchange of information and expertise. I thank very much the chair of the forum and the helpers and the staff. You know who you are. Thank you very much for making this happen. Thank you also to the speakers, and thanks to all those who participated in this discussion, which was very active on the chat as well. So thank you very much for being with us today. I would like to have a round of applause for everyone who spoke today. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonella, and thank you for the panelists and you for sharing your interesting presentations and insights on blue economy and a healthy ocean. So we look forward to working with you in future.